Imagine being trapped, not in a room, not in a prison, but in your own mind, where every thought spirals into another, twisting reality, feeding off fear, rewriting the past, and poisoning every potential future. This isn't overthinking. This is self-sabotage dressed as caution. In the shadows of your mind, your thoughts aren't just thoughts, they're predators. Tonight, we uncover the dark psychology of overthinking and how it's silently killing your confidence, controlling your actions, and convincing you to destroy your own peace. Overthinking, at its core, is one of the most deceptive psychological traps a person can fall into. It masquerades as deep thinking, thoroughness, and caution. But in reality, it slowly erodes your mental stability, your emotional clarity, and your ability to act. When we say overthinking is a form of cognitive self-torture, we mean that it is a mental loop designed not to uncover truth, but to feed on fear, uncertainty, and self-doubt. Far from providing answers, overthinking leads you down a rabbit hole of endless what-ifs and paralyzing possibilities, none of which bring clarity, only confusion and emotional pain. On the surface, it may seem harmless, just a nagging thought here, an uncomfortable feeling there. But over time, this repetitive internal dialogue becomes your norm. Your brain starts seeing danger where there is none. You begin to analyze every tone in a conversation, every delay in a text message, every unexpected glance from a stranger. You replay decisions made weeks, months, or years ago, haunted by a constant internal voice whispering, "You should have done it differently." And here lies the dark psychology behind it. Your own mind becomes both the abuser and the victim. The human brain is designed to protect you. That's what it thinks it's doing. But in overthinking, your survival instincts become distorted. Rather than interpreting reality as it is, your mind starts filtering everything through worst-case scenarios. It becomes an amplifier for fear. The things that hurt you in the past, rejection, loss, shame, failure, don't just become memories. They evolve into scripts. You begin reading those scripts into situations that haven't even happened yet. You've trained your brain to believe in pain before possibility, doubt before hope, and risk before reward. This is a form of mental self-harm. You may not see the scars, but they are there. In your hesitation to speak up, in your reluctance to try, in your chronic need for validation, in the way you replay your flaws over and over like a movie reel from hell. In the world of dark psychology, overthinking is not just a bad habit. It is a psychological punishment you administer to yourself, usually unconsciously, until it becomes a lifestyle. Worse still, overthinking becomes addictive. Your brain starts to crave the illusion of control that overthinking gives. Every time you ruminate, every time you go over the same scenario again and again, there's a strange reassurance in it. You feel like you're doing something about it, like you're getting ahead of the danger. But the truth is, you're not preventing disaster. You're rehearsing misery. You're becoming emotionally comfortable with suffering because it feels safer than uncertainty. That is perhaps the most sinister aspect of overthinking. Convinces you that it's protecting you, while in reality, it's slowly tearing you apart from the inside. What makes this even more dangerous is that most people who suffer from overthinking don't see it as a problem. They might joke about it or mention it casually, "I'm such an overthinker," but rarely do they grasp how deeply it compromises their relationships, their careers, and their happiness. They don't see the opportunities missed, the joy stolen, or the years wasted in mental paralysis. They don't realize they are torturing themselves with 1,000 invisible cuts every single day and calling it being responsible. So when we say overthinking is a form of cognitive self-torture, it's not an exaggeration. It's the uncomfortable truth. It is the mind attacking itself with invisible weapons, unrelenting thoughts, memories, fears, and doubts. It is one of the most common, insidious forms of psychological sabotage. And the worst part? It always feels like it's trying to help you, until it ruins you. Overthinking isn't just a harmless mental habit. It is a powerful psychological process that creates false realities so vivid, your brain starts reacting to illusions as if they were facts. The mind, when left unchecked, begins to fill in the blanks between uncertainty and fear, stitching together worst-case scenarios with your insecurities. In this space, logic doesn't lead, emotion does. And when emotion is driven by fear, anxiety, rejection, or past wounds, the future you imagine quickly turns against you. You may begin to notice a shift. Instead of responding to events based on truth, you start responding to your predictions of what might go wrong. A delayed text becomes rejection. A strange look becomes judgment. A minor mistake becomes irreversible failure. Overthinking turns shadows into monsters and possibility into paranoia. Here lies the disturbing part. Your behavior starts adapting to these imagined threats. You become defensive where no attack exists. You become withdrawn when love is present. You overcompensate when no one is watching. In this distorted reality, you're no longer dealing with the present moment. You're reacting to mental phantoms that you created. This is where the dark psychology of overthinking becomes destructive. These imagined outcomes don't just stay in your mind. They begin to shape your choices, your body language, and your emotional energy. Others pick up on that. Relationships begin to strain. Confidence starts to crack. Opportunities slip away. And before you realize it, the reality you feared has become the reality you created. That's the feedback loop. When the brain believes something strongly enough, it manifests behaviors that bring those beliefs to life. Overthinking isn't just a thought problem. It's a life distortion mechanism masked as caution. It hijacks emotional energy and weaponizes it against your future. Now consider this. Why does the brain overthink in the first place? It's addicted not to worry, but to control. The illusion of control is one of the most dangerous psychological baits the mind can chase. When you overthink, your brain falsely believes it's doing something. Solving a problem, preparing for disappointment, preventing pain. In reality, it's creating stress loops based on what could happen because the mind fears uncertainty more than discomfort. It would rather burn energy on imaginary risks than surrender to the unknown. This addiction to control leads to chronically anxious minds. You need to know what someone meant by a single word. You need to be sure your idea won't fail. You need to rehearse every response in a conversation before you speak. This isn't planning, it's spiraling. Because in the mind of an overthinker, anything that cannot be predicted becomes a threat. You stop trusting the process, people, and even yourself. Suspicion becomes your safety net. You start building an armor made of questions with no answers. You can't relax even when nothing's wrong, because your brain is addicted to identifying what might go wrong next. But here's the brutal truth. Control is an illusion. No amount of thinking will guarantee safety, success, or certainty. And the more you overthink, the further you fall into psychological paralysis. You start over-preparing for things that never happen. You decline opportunities because risk feels unbearable. You push people away because closeness feels dangerous. Overthinking doesn't protect you, it shrinks you. It convinces you that suffering now is safer than uncertainty later. You don't live, you rehearse fear. That is the trap. The brain creates a false reality, becomes addicted to trying to control it, and then slowly erodes your confidence and peace one obsessive thought at a time. You become a prisoner, not of others, not of circumstances, but of your own imagination. And unless this loop is broken, overthinking won't just shape your thoughts, it will shape your identity. The destructive nature of overthinking extends beyond the mind. It seeps into every decision, every action, and every moment of silence when you're supposed to feel peace. At first glance, people may applaud your attention to detail, your ability to consider every angle, your concern with getting things right. But what they don't see is what it's costing you underneath, the slow erosion of your ability to act with certainty. Overthinking is not better decision-making. It's the exact opposite. It's a psychological attack on your instincts, your confidence, and your sense of direction. When your mind is caught in endless loops of what might go wrong, your ability to choose is paralyzed by the illusion that there is always a better option, a safer time, or more information to gather. You end up in a state of psychological limbo, where clarity doesn't exist. Only hesitation does. This hesitation is the thief of growth. You will miss chances that never come back. You will delay conversations that needed to happen. You will stay stuck in jobs, relationships, and routines far longer than necessary. Not because they're fulfilling, but because your fear-based brain finds comfort in the familiar. Every decision becomes a personal interrogation. You second-guess not because the situation demands deep thought, but because your mind has convinced you that a wrong move is too dangerous to risk. But here's the dark truth. Indecision is often more damaging than a bad decision. Overthinking doesn't just cause regret from what you did. It causes the kind of regret that's far worse. Regret for what you never allowed yourself to do. Over time, this cycle becomes the norm, and the mind begins to reflect this internal warfare externally. The thoughts that plague your nervous system don't stay in your head. They bleed into your posture, your tone of voice, your energy in a room. You show up in the world as uncertain. You radiate conflict. People feel that. Opportunities respond to that. Because in every interaction, there's a dynamic happening. Confidence attracts, hesitation repels. And when you've lived in a spiral of overthinking for too long, you are no longer just perceiving danger, you are creating it. What makes this even more devastating is that overthinking convinces you that you're helping yourself. The mind believes over-preparation is safety. You think going over every detail 100 times is protecting you, but it's training your nervous system to associate every challenge with panic. That is psychological warfare, and the enemy is internal. What you may not realize is this: the longer you stay in that loop, the more your mind begins to serve fear instead of growth. You no longer act to move forward, you act to avoid discomfort. And when your life is shaped by the avoidance of chaos rather than the pursuit of purpose, you've already lost your freedom. This is what happens when the mind becomes its own oppressor. Slowly, subtly, it replaces instinct with overanalysis, courage with caution, progress with paralysis. You may still smile, you may still function, but inside, something vital is missing. You don't feel alive. You feel trapped. Trapped not by doors, not by people, not by circumstances, but by thoughts that refuse to let you rest. You think about things that don't exist yet. You demonize possibilities before you give them a chance. And worse, you think this is normal. The cruel genius of overthinking is that it convinces you the worry is necessary. That if you stop thinking, something bad will happen. But the truth is, something worse is already happening. You're losing yourself to an invisible war. Until you reclaim your right to act decisively, to risk without overanalyzing rejection, to breathe without bracing for disaster, you will remain the prisoner of a mind trained to fear its own freedom. The mind of the overthinker is not lazy. It is hyperactive, hypervigilant, and constantly scanning for threats that don't even exist. It's exhausting not because it's solving real problems, but because it's playing a psychological game that can't be won, anticipating every possible outcome in the hope of avoiding pain. This is not strategy. This is survival mode. And when the brain lives in survival mode for too long, it becomes convinced that certainty and safety are the only acceptable environments. But life doesn't work that way. The need for control becomes a form of psychological self-abuse, where perfection is demanded in a world that is unpredictable by nature. Overthinkers don't fear making a mistake. They fear the emotional consequence they've attached to the mistake. It's not just about failing. It's about what they believe failure means about them. Somewhere in the subconscious, overthinking is not really about solutions. It's about avoiding shame, embarrassment, disappointment, or rejection. Those emotions are so deeply feared that the brain builds mental barriers to delay action. Overanalyzing gives the illusion of productivity, but it's a brilliant disguise. The truth is, you're trying to protect yourself from the feeling of inadequacy. Every time you analyze when you don't need to, you're reinforcing the belief that you're not ready, not capable, not good enough to handle what might come next. Overthinking becomes the brain's coping mechanism, but that mechanism is broken. Instead of diffusing anxiety, it perpetuates it. Instead of preparing for life, it paralyzes you from living it. And worst of all, it becomes a lifestyle, where chaos feels normal and stillness feels like negligence. So you run back to the spiral every time life slows down, as if stressing keeps you safe. That's not logic. That's trauma. That's how silence becomes suspicious. How peace feels dangerous. Because overthinking doesn't just create discomfort, it makes discomfort your climate. And no one can grow in a storm they refuse to leave. But there's another layer to this, one most people never see. Overthinking doesn't just affect how you make decisions. It corrodes your self-trust. The more you overthink, the more you train your mind to believe that your first instinct is wrong. You stop listening to your gut. You become suspicious of your own intuition. You give power to every possible outside opinion because deep down, you've convinced yourself that your own voice isn't reliable. That's what's most dangerous about overthinking. It doesn't just delay action. It dismantles your personal authority. Your ability to access your inner compass fades over time, until every choice requires someone else's reassurance. You end up outsourcing your confidence. You seek validation before decisions. You poll your friends. You wait for a sign. Even simple choices start to feel like risks, because your brain no longer believes in your ability to handle consequences, whether emotional or practical. And when you lose that belief, you don't just second-guess your actions, you second-guess yourself. Confidence becomes something you perform, not something you feel. And slowly, overthinking rewires your identity. You are no longer someone who acts, you are someone who analyzes acting. You don't live. You review life as if it's a test you're afraid to fail. This loss of self-trust is why overthinking doesn't go away on its own. You can't just force yourself to stop. Because beneath the spiral is a belief system, one built on insecurity, fear, and the perceived need to be perfect. Until you confront that, you will always return to the spiral. Not because you want to, but because it feels safer than trusting yourself. And that is the final trap. Overthinking doesn't just delay action, it slowly convinces you that without it, you won't survive. That without the stress, the spinning, the worrying, you won't be okay. But that's the lie. You won't find certainty through overthinking. You only ever find self-doubt, disguised as control. Overthinking is not just a mental nuisance, it is a system of internal sabotage. The most dangerous aspect of overthinking is that it shifts your identity from being the pilot of your life to being a passenger trapped inside your own mind. As this process deepens, the mind becomes both the oppressor and the victim. You are the one generating the thoughts, but you're also the one being consumed by them. You build a mental prison of doubt, fear, and hesitation, then lock yourself inside and throw away the key. When the mind turns inward and becomes hyperanalytical, it begins to focus less on what is real and more on what is imagined. This imagined world begins to grow in intensity, creating inner dialogues that question your every move. What if it goes wrong? What if I fail? What will people think? These voices become your internal operating system. Slowly, you stop trusting your gut. You start seeking permission, proof, and predictable outcomes for everything. Confidence gets replaced with chronic hesitation, and you begin outsourcing self-belief to other people's opinions. The power of overthinking lies in its ability to make fear feel rational. Convinces you that by thinking more, you are preparing more, being responsible, being smart. But preparation and paranoia are not the same. Overthinking isn't clarity. It's chaos with a calm voice. It speaks to you as if it's protecting you when in reality, it's pulling you backward. The danger here is subtle. The more you rely on overthinking to make decisions, the more you teach your brain that fear must be negotiated with before you act. You make fear your advisor and eventually your ruler. In this internal war, the cost is your peace. You find yourself restless when it's quiet, distracted when you try to rest. Time alone becomes mentally loud because the absence of external distractions leaves you face to face with every doubt you've been avoiding. Stillness feels wrong. Silence feels threatening. You build routines, overwork, and distractions to avoid confronting this noise. This is not productivity, it's psychological avoidance. Overthinking convinces you that stillness is laziness and that peace means something bad is about to happen. As a result, you're always on edge, waiting, worrying, spiraling. This constant internal battle slowly kills your authenticity. You no longer do things because you want to, but because you feel you should or have to. Every decision becomes a performance. Every conversation is rehearsed. Every post, every text, every word becomes filtered, edited, softened. You stop showing up as yourself and start showing up as a version of you that's been polished, trimmed, and pre-approved by fear. This is what overthinking steals. Not just your time or energy, but you. It strips you of rawness, of expression, of real connection. You hide your truth not because the world won't understand it, but because your mind has convinced you it's dangerous to be seen. This is the ultimate betrayal of overthinking. It convinces you that controlling situations is the key to safety when, in reality, it's robbing you of freedom. You become stuck in your head, living for a tomorrow that never comes, reliving yesterdays that can't be changed, all while the present moment slips quietly through your fingers. Overthinking doesn't just delay your actions, it dismantles your relationship with now. The joy of spontaneity, the clarity of instinct, the relief of peace, all sacrificed on the altar of what if. And what's most tragic, you do it to yourself. Not consciously, not maliciously, but through habit, through fear learned long ago, through pain never processed. And unless you face it, unless you confront those thoughts, question their truth, and rebuild trust in your ability to act despite fear, you will remain in that cage. The bars might be invisible, but the prison is real. Overthinking is not awareness. It is not intelligence. It is the slow and silent erosion of your power, cloaked in the lie of caution.